Hello and welcome to the Source One podcast. Consider us your source for the latest procurement, supply management, and strategic sourcing insights, anytime, anywhere.
So, Tom, before we get started, would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your contribution to procurement transformation industry perspectives?
Sure. My name's Tom Rogers, and I'm CEO of Vendor Centric. We're a boutique consulting firm based in suburban Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C. Our specialty is kind of emerging business discipline of vendor management. And when we were speaking together previously about contributing to the white paper, I think the topic that really is on the front burner, both for you guys and your clients and ours, is this whole idea of procurement really moving from a pure compliant area within an organization to really being more on the front end and being more strategic in addressing not just compliance issues, but really risk management around third-party vendor relationships, more cost control focus, and of course kind of improving performance with those relationships as well. So the contribution to the white paper was really around that transformation of procurement from that focus around compliance to the continued evolvement into a more really higher level business discipline and a broader focus on vendor management as well.
So you already sort of answered my first question then about the traditional role of procurement. Could you tell me a little bit more? What's causing a change to this traditional role? Why are we seeing procurement evolve into more of a risk management function, and why should people care?
Sure. So I think there's a lot of things going on. Some of the ones that you see the most of in the press are there's a lot of third-party failures that have been happening. So I think data breaches are probably the biggest of those, and some of the issues that are being created with companies using vendors to process credit card information, collect information from their customers or their members, storing that and maintaining that. Those are traditionally relationships that a lot of companies outsource and use vendors for, and there's been a lot of coverage recently about breaches into those vendors and their systems and the data. And I think while ultimately it's the vendor that's maintaining those systems, it's really up to the individual organization that's hired that vendor to make sure that any information they're collecting is stored and managed in an appropriate way. So, and something I think relevant to that is the whole GDPR that's happening in Europe right now, and the fines and penalties that are happening to organizations that don't comply with that. So I think data breaches are a big issue that are driving third-party oversight. Compliance regulations are certainly a big issue. You've got regulatory bodies in the banking, financial services industries. Same thing with federal grant recipients, so organizations get money from the federal government. There's a lot of regulations going on right now around procurement, around third-party oversight and risk mitigation. And those types of things, along with these data breaches, along with the growth in just broader enterprise risk management, are all kind of bubbling this issue to the top that a common denominator in all of that are these third-party vendors. So organizations can't really just focus around the basic procurement component anymore. They have to think about that whole relationship with the vendor and dealing with that from start to finish. And I think those are a lot of the things that are driving that. And you asked why organizations should care. Well, GDPR is a good example. There are actual fines that companies have to pay, pretty significant fines if they're found to not be in compliance. Or if you're an organization that relies on federal funding, if you're not complying with some of the procurement requirements that have come out recently, you have the chance of losing that funding in the future. Same thing with HIPAA regulations. There are fines related to that as well. So all that stuff is really starting to impact potentially the bottom line, as well as exposure and risk of just, being outed in the public papers for having a vendor that stored data on thousands of your customers that got breached, which nobody wants.
And is there ever an internal burning platform that inspires this change in procurement, or is it usually these external factors sort of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, forcing procurement's hand into sort of taking on this role?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my experience has been that I think when you talk to the CFO or you talk to head of compliance or head of procurement, there's usually a desire internally to deal with these issues, but they're one of several issues that those groups are dealing with. So what we're generally finding is that the organizations that are really taking action on this and doing something about it, they're doing it because of these external pressures that are coming in on them. So that's really what we're finding is driving the change and at least starting the conversation. And I think folks are really starting to pay more attention to it now.
And what would you say makes procurement uniquely equipped to take on that risk management role?
Well, I'm not sure procurement is completely equipped to do that, to be honest with you. I think in a lot of organizations, procurement is, there's still a level of, it certainly includes sourcing a lot of times. It includes, obviously competitive bidding and those types of things, all the way up through when the actual procurement is complete and the contract is signed oftentimes. But that ongoing kind of evaluation and due diligence and risk mitigation, a lot of times that lives in a variety of other places. It could be compliance, it could be finance, it could be the risk department, it could be the actual business owners themselves. So I think procurement may not be equipped to deal with all that right now and needs to evolve and transform to really be a gatekeeper for a lot of that, and also to be the facilitator of the conversations with all those different business owners and different departments to ensure that those risks are being dealt with and appropriate due diligence is being done. So I think there's some evolution that's going to need to happen in that procurement function to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. And what do you see as being kind of the impetus for that evolution? Do you think it's going to be companies are going to have to be forced into it by these external forces? Do you think it's a matter of getting the right talent on board? What is holding procurement back in your mind? Is it maybe a negative perception about this history of doing little other than enforcing compliance?
I think it's going to be a little different for each organization and to how they address it. I think there's certainly companies that are way more evolved on this topic, and they're being proactive in addressing this. I think those are typically the larger organizations that have resources, that maybe have supply chains that they're managing, and those guys are on the front end of this. I think the ones that are kind of getting dragged along are those that don't have those resources internally right now and haven't really had to deal with some of the stuff around risk and due diligence and data breaches and things like that in the past. So those groups are really more around, I think, getting the tone at the top right. So getting the senior management to focus on this and see it as an issue, and then putting the right resources in place, whether that be internal resources or whether they go and partner with a company that has expertise in these areas that can come in and augment the staff and the resources that they already have. Those are the groups that are moving along a little bit slower and are kind of needing to be pulled along by a lot of these external influences. But there are many organizations, I think, that are trying to get on the front end of this and being proactive as well. And for those guys, they're looking to build up their resources a bit more. I think they're also looking at maybe some of the processes that they've had in place that might be a little bit more antiquated, and that they are looking to evolve them to include more of this risk type approach to these vendor relationships and procurement as well. So there's different evolutions going on at different types of organizations. It really depends on where you are as to what's driving it.
Mm-hmm. And you talk in your contribution to the white paper about the importance of creating vendor management committees to make, risk management across the supply chain a full-time job. In addition to procurement, who do you see as being an important voice on these committees?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few flavors of that. I think there's there's the committee. You could have a vendor management committee, or some organizations have a formal vendor management office that either encompasses procurement or it sits beside procurement. But the types of stakeholders that you really need to bring to the table, obviously, are the procurement team. You need to bring compliance to the table, because a lot of times there's compliance issues that are driving third-party oversight. You want to bring finance to the table. There's obviously cost control, everything around kind of the purchasing and payment process related to vendors is important as well. You want to bring legal to the table, because there's a lot of issues dealing with third-party risk mitigation and contracting, and ensuring that you have the right contract standards in place and that people are following the process appropriately. And obviously you want to bring the business owners to the table, so the people that are kind of down on the ground level, that are going out finding vendors, negotiating with them, and contracting with them on a daily basis. The leaders of that group really need to be part of that conversation as well. So it's coordinating all of those folks together and getting them aligned at the right time in the vendor relationship is where these committees come in, or if there is a formal vendor management office, where the VMO comes into that as well.
Would you say that you're optimistic about organizations' ability to evolve ahead of these emerging risk factors?
As of right now, I'm not so sure of that. I think again, partly because of just the traditional role that procurement has had. Also, just looking at a lot of the organizations that we work with, the procurement shops are running 100 miles an hour all day, every day. So just the ability to step back and kind of deal with some of these more strategic issues, and then think about how to integrate them into operations, it's really hard for them to do that. And